So let me begin. I'm John Byrne with Poets and Quants. Thanks for joining us here. We're doing this Zoom meeting from our offices in Oakland, California. And we thought it'd be a really good time to give people a little bit of an update on what we're seeing in the market, as well as sort of where we are in terms of applications, the employment reports, admission trends, rankings, and also what's happening with Poets and Quants. So let's just start with the idea this is the real hot time. Right now, we are getting something like 450,000 uniques a month on the site. And 35% of our traffic is from outside the United States. And it's the hot period because, of course, you have the round one applicants who are anxiously awaiting whether or not they'll be interviewed. And then if they already have been interviewed, waiting for a decision. And you have the round two folks very much deeply involved in preparing their applications for round two, starting in January. So and also you have a very heavy news cycle with a number of the key rankings either coming out or about to come out. And we just had the Economist Ranking. Up next will be the Bloomberg Business Week ranking. And the date for that, if you'd like to know, in fact, is, it's going to be 11/9. It's going to appear online. So that's a Friday, November 9th, for the Business Week ranking. And then there's going to be the new ranking by the Wall Street Journal and Times Higher Ed, which is going to be kind of goofy because so many of the elite schools have decided not to participate. So you're going to get a very lopsided and awkward list that's not going to have much credibility. We are going to publish our composite ranking within days of the new Business Week ranking. As you know, what we do is we take the 5 most influential rankings, which would be U.S. News, Financial Times, The Economist, Forbes, and Business Week, and mash them together with certain weights that we attach based on what we think of the methodology. I've had a dean this year tell me we should do a deconstructed ranking, which I find interesting because the composite ranking really doesn't, really include the way at least I think about the quality of business schools. And in general, I think there are way too many metrics, and many of the metrics that are used by the major ranking organizations are frankly, if not flawed, because they don't quite measure what you want it to measure. They actually measure things that don't matter in terms of overall quality of a program or a school. So I actually had a dean tell me, why don't you just parse the different data points from the different rankings that are out there, take what you think really matters, tell people why it matters, and then do your own ranking based on that. I've been a little bit reluctant to do that, frankly, because I don't want confusion between our composite ranking, which we've done for the past 9 years, and this new thing, but we might try that in the spring when we get all the latest and new data from after the U.S. News report comes out. So here's where we are in terms of the industry, at least where I think we are. I think for full-time MBA programs, it's become more competitive than ever. I almost see among admissions offices, not hysteria, but tremendous pressure to get out in the market and recruit more students. In part, some of this is occurring because of the obvious decline in MBA applications. As readers of Poets and Quants know, applications at 70% of the schools for 2-year MBA programs were down last year. Most of that decline in the US was devoted to a diminishment of applications from international candidates. The GMAT data essentially showed that international applications were down about 10.5%, while domestic apps were down 1.8%. We don't think there's going to be any change in that, but one point of disagreement that we would have with the GMAT report is that there was an indication that more people were going to be applying to European and Asian schools, and frankly, the data doesn't really show it. We just did a fairly comprehensive review of admissions data from the top 20 European schools. And frankly, it's all over the lot. Some are up, some are down. And when they're up, they're not up a whole lot. There's, one or two exceptions to that rule. But generally, I would say that European applications appear to be, if not flat, just a little bit up. So it's not really accounting for the total decline in applications in the US. Which leads me to think that a lot of people are just saying, okay, we're going to wait. We're going to wait it out. We already have a good job. We can wait another 1 or 2 years, and we're going to see how all this anti-immigration rhetoric in the United States plays out, along with the uncertainty over the visa issue. And you're seeing schools actually take some steps to deal with the visa uncertainty. Rochester, for example, actually was able to get its entire MBA program STEM designated, which gives people the opportunity to get a work permit for up to 3 years in the United States. So even if you major in something like marketing in the Rochester MBA program, you can now get STEM designation. Duke and a few other programs have, analytics concentrations that allow for STEM designation. I think we're probably going to see more of that to combat the worry over the decline in international applicants. And this is a worry that's largely devoted to diversity issues, because I think the schools, at least the better schools, are very deep in applicant quality. So they really don't have to worry all that much about the quality of the pool declining, at least in the short term. I mean, if this persists over a number of years, that's a different story. But right now, there's really no decline in quality at the top schools. The bigger issues for second-tier schools that are really struggling to gain attention. And a lot of those schools were, fairly dependent on international applicants, and that's hurt to some degree. So you're also seeing it becoming more competitive in the sense that more schools are even throwing more scholarship dollars at candidates. And in many cases, of course, what they're doing is, from our perspective, is they're buying GMAT scores, in part because of the pressure from US News, which uses average GMAT and GRE scores in its methodology. Some of the decline, and some of the European schools are saying that the reason why they think applications are not up as much as they might have thought, and in some cases they're down, even London Business School, for example, is down, would be because of the increased numbers of people going to specialized master's programs. Now, there's no doubt that the big growth areas in management education in the past 3 years have been basically specialty masters, and the hottest single degree that almost every school already has or is about to launch is the degree in data or business analytics. Second hottest area is undergraduate business education, particularly in the US, where enrollments have been booming, in large part because parents are pressuring their kids not to major in subjects that won't essentially give them great odds for getting a job right after graduation. And then the third area is online MBAs. And the online MBA category is already fairly cluttered with nearly 300 players in the US alone. But what you're seeing now is even schools that have a greater rep or greater ranking in the residential programs, they're getting into the act. So we're going to see several big launches of online MBA programs from Michigan Ross over the next year, which if you've been reading Poets and Quants, well, we broke that story. We also broke the story that UC Davis has partnered with 2U and will launch an online MBA next year as well. What's interesting about the UC Davis program is that's the first UC to launch an online MBA. So I think that that's going to need quite a bit of attention. We just completed our online ranking, and we actually found out that USC Marshall, another fairly prominent, great brand school, was #1. So you're going to see a lot more action there as well. So, but the thinking here is that the specialty masters, the online MBAs, and even to some extent undergraduate education is cannibalizing the full-time two-year MBA market. Undergraduates who are coming out of business school today are better prepared than ever. The quality of that education is truly superb. And in many cases, you have companies, particularly in the finance sector, that are finding that they would prefer to hire an undergraduate than an MBA, because MBAs have become too expensive for them. And then obviously the flexibility and the increased credibility of an online MBA, particularly from the kinds of institutions that are granting it today, is making some people say, hey, I'm going to keep my job, I'm going to do the online thing, and I may not be able to transition into a new industry or a new discipline, but it's going to accelerate my career, and I'm happy where I am, and that's what matters to me. And then you have people with basically the cost of the full-time two-year MBA. They're looking at, or they graduated with a liberal arts major and they're having trouble finding a job, and specialized master's degrees in business have become a way for them to get good gainful employment. You look at the placement numbers, in fact, out of the business analytics programs or the supply chain logistics programs, and they are spectacular. They're just as good as like the top of the ranked business schools in the MBA market. So they're really delivering a lot of value. They're doing it quickly in 1 year and at a fraction of the cost of the full-time MBA. So I think there's some cannibalization of the market there. Nonetheless, on the admission side, I think it's more competitive than ever before, and some schools are really working hard because of those application declines to make sure they don't get steeper and they don't get into the point where it starts to eat into the quality of the applicant pool. The other thing we're seeing with the employment reports that are coming out of the schools, you know, there's only a few so far. We expect a whole bunch to tumble out over the next 2 weeks. Harvard Business School is coming up today, in fact. The reports are really good. Compensation is up again. In many cases, the job offer rates are equal to last year or even better. This is kind of like one of the best MBA markets we've ever seen. So one argument that you can't make is that the MBA is not delivering ROI for the people who are getting it, because these employment reports are off the charts. People are really getting great jobs at great rates of pay. Very few people are unemployed. The market, in fact, probably could absorb a lot more MBAs than the market is actually producing, particularly at the top end. So, and when I say the top end, I'm thinking the top 50 schools. And the reports are, incidentally, from many schools that are telling us that number of company briefings that have been booked on campus, along with internship presentations and internship recruiting, is so high already this fall that some schools have their whole calendar full. They have no capacity to bring in more companies, even though there is demand. So while in general terms we may start to be worrying about a recession in the United States and the market tanking, and there's increased concern about the economy as interest rates rise along with their debt, there's no sign, at least in the corporate sector, that there'll be any sort of diminishment in the recruitment of MBAs for next year. And the employment reports so far have been really solid and good, only confirming the value of the degree, which is a terrific thing. So those pesky little things called rankings, let's talk a little bit about them. As you know, the first ranking of every year is the Financial Times ranking. And that ranking has a lot of different metrics that are considered in it. To my liking, way too many, because it's often hard when you have a lot of different metrics that are being looked at to really judge what's going on. The black box gets darker than ever, and what comes out of it is often more mysterious than ever. In this case, Financial Times actually had Stanford first, knocking out NCOD, which had been first for 2 years in a row. For Stanford, incidentally, and this is kind of interesting, it's only the second time in the 23 years that the FT has been ranking schools that Stanford has been on top. We don't see any significant changes in their methodology coming up. So what you see is kind of what you get. And, you know, in the new year, that obviously will be the first new ranking out of the gate. Second ranking, obviously, and I should just add, EFT ranking, without question, is the most important, most influential ranking in Europe and Asia. In the US, people are paying much less attention to it. It's much less powerful, has much less impact. So in the US, the big impact ranking now is US News and World Report, like it or not. And that comes out in March. This year, Booth came in first for the first time. And if you look at it overall at the top of the list, what you're seeing, I think, is Chicago Booth and Michigan Ross making big gains in a number of the rankings. Wharton slipping a little because Wharton had great momentum the previous year. Yale is slipping a little bit as well. But Chicago Booth and Michigan Ross coming out really, really strong. So the other interesting thing about the US News ranking, besides the fact that Booth was #1 for the first time ever, was that the methodology US News is using is not able to differentiate very well among the schools that are numerically ranked. So if you look at the top 20 schools this past year in the US News ranking, half of them were in positions where they shared their rank with another school or more than another school. And it just shows you the limits of the ranking, as well as the fact that, as we've said many, many, many times before, the underlying index scores that determine the actual numerical ranks of each school are so closely clustered together that they're statistically meaningless. So on some level, it's basically intellectually disingenuous for an FT or any of the major rankings to say this school is #3 and this school is #5 or #7, when there probably is no statistical difference, at least as can be measured by the methodologies that these different organizations deploy. I'd argue that there are more significant differences that the methodologies cannot measure because the metrics they're using are unable to capture it. So I'll give you an example of that. I think endowments tell me a lot about the strength and the quality of a business school, because the larger the endowment, the more money a school has to get the best faculty in the world, to put up the best infrastructure and buildings and technology on campus, and to frankly buy the best students with scholarship money. And yet there's not a single one of all 5 rankings that even take endowment into account. Another really good point here in terms of the rankings would be capturing the quality of the actual academic and extracurricular experience. While some schools do, sorry, not schools, but certain organizations do surveys of either current students or recent graduates or alums, the truth is that those surveys, while they tell you something, they don't tell you enough. And the reason is because everyone filling them out obviously knows that they're essentially grading their own alma mater, and unless they're incredibly unhappy, and very few people are unhappy, they're cheerleading. So the results aren't as candid as you'd like them to be. Now, you can argue that that bias is spread across the entire sample and every school benefits from it. So therefore, smaller differences still mean something. And I might say, yeah, to some extent, that's probably true. But those surveys are compromised, so we're not really getting a good sense of the true quality of the academic and the extracurricular experience in an MBA program. So those are two glaring problems that these rankings have that lead to these clustered results and less credible results. And then, of course, we just had the Economist Ranking. Booth recaptured first there. Kellogg had been in first the previous year. And the Economist Ranking is probably, I would say, the most unpredictable ranking and the ranking that is the least influential among the top 5. That's in part because the results are all over the place. And it's interesting when you look at the Economist ranking versus the FT ranking, there are literally schools on the FT list that are high up that don't make the Economist list, and vice versa, even though they're both lists that purport to measure globally the quality of MBA programs. Bloomberg Business Week will be out, as I pointed out before, on November 9th. Yet again, they've changed their methodology and tweaked it. This is, I think, the 3rd time in the last 4 or 5 years that they've actually changed the methodology. What's going to happen there? Who the heck knows? Because that ranking has also become almost like the Economist ranking, incredibly unpredictable and volatile, and you just don't know how the changes in the ranking methodology is going to lead to a different result. Business Week publishes, a separate list, as many of you know, for the domestic schools in the U.S. and then a separate list for the international schools. Used to be that they would put all this out in one fell swoop, but lately they've been separating it by a month, so you won't get the international look from Business Week until December. As I pointed out, we intend to come out with our composite ranking 4 days after Business Week releases its ranking, and there'll be no change at all in our methodology. It's a simple and clean thing. What I really like about it is, to the extent that every single ranking creates anomalies that are unexplainable and results that are essentially worthless or deeply flawed, by mushing them together, you don't get a perfect ranking. But what you do is you diminish the anomalies in any given ranking, and you do get, on some level, to a greater truth. And I think that's really valuable. It's also valuable for candidates to go to one place, see where each of the rankings place their school, see where there are great disparities, because I also think that when there's a greater consensus about where a school is across the 5 lists, that's a more credible result for the school, regardless of the clustering and the problems that the rankings have. So you can see that in one quick glimpse, and then also get a fairly overall good picture based on what I think the quality of the methodologies are. All of them flawed, all of them perfect, some even dishonest. Many by, and I will say it, mindless journalists. I'm a journalist too, and I've been mindless at times. But many of these methodologies have been created by journalists who really, they don't have an MBA. They haven't been in business school. Many of them have barely talked to MBA students to find out what's really important to them. And they create these methodologies, and lo and behold, small changes and small decisions about what should matter and what shouldn't matter weighs heavily in the final result. And then, the big news too is that, like I mentioned before, the Wall Street Journal and the Times Higher Education ranking, they've come into the mix. I don't think that it's going to be a credible list, mainly because you have really, really good schools like Harvard and Kellogg and Columbia who've decided not to participate, among others. And so you're going to get a wacky kind of list. And this is a ranking that was supposed to be out a long time ago, and the complications of putting it together have delayed it again and again and again. Who knows what this list is going to look like. I do think that it's possible that in the second iteration of the list, a few more schools may agree to participate, and their participation will, of course, help increase the credibility of the list. But first time out, it's just going to be garbage in, garbage out, and I think it's going to be a bit of a laughing stock, to be completely and totally honest. We have no intention of including it in our composite ranking, not now, probably not never. I think 5 is enough. We're all overdosed on rankings. I think most of the schools are basically fed up with it, and I don't bother. I mean, I don't blame you for being fed up, because the results are all over the place. and they're just misleading a lot of people, frankly. But on the other hand, people are still obsessed with them. I can tell you that, you know, when we look at our traffic, and obviously we cover these rankings and we cover them fairly critically, you know, the single biggest traffic getter that we have is our Meet the Class series now. And the second biggest traffic getter we have is our coverage of rankings overall. And the third biggest is our handicapping series, where we basically invite candidates to tell us what their raw profiles are and their target schools. And then we essentially take a guess at what their odds are of getting in and what the problems are in their applications. So, you know, ranking is still incredibly important. People pore over them. People are slicing and dicing them in their spreadsheets to make their decisions about where they go. And the one thing that you could probably expect from the Times Higher Education Wall Street Journal ranking, frankly, is they're going to be schools that are going to use their rank, which will be an artificial rank because of the absence of some of the best schools in the world out of that list. They're going to use their rank to help market and promote their programs, at least on their websites. So that's sort of where we are on the rankings. They're not going to go away. They're going to stay. If anything, they're going to increase. I even had a call, I'll tell you, from the editor of Fast Company and Inc. magazine asking me to collaborate with them on a new MBA ranking. I said, forget it. This is just, it's just too much. Who needs it? It's just a pain. And you're not going to get any cooperation from the schools, and I don't blame you because I wouldn't cooperate with any more rankings either. In fact, I sometimes wonder if the fact that we do our composite, which is really, you know, a heavily looked at list by a lot of people, if we actually dropped one of the four or one of the five that we have in there, if that would lead more schools to drop that ranking, I'm going to suspect that it would, in fact. Based on the questions that I get every year from different schools about the rankings. As you know, besides that composite ranking, you know, we're doing an online MBA ranking. I'll tell you why. Schools have come to us and basically, you know, they're very dissatisfied with the two rankings that do exist. That's US News and the FT. The FT is extremely limited and largely European-centric, and there's only 20 or so schools that are even listed. The U.S. News ranking has 280 some schools. Online MBA program is listed, but it's you know, pretty schlocky methodology. So we were asked by schools to come into the market, and I think we produced, you know, fairly decent ranking. I'm not going to defend and say that it's the greatest thing. But I think it's very helpful for people because we really take the same approach here as we take in our undergraduate business school ranking. And I really believe that this is true. There are three important parts to measure the quality of a program. First part is your raw input. You know, what kind of quality is coming into the door to begin with in terms of your students. What do you do then? The second part is with the students academically and on the extracurricular front. While they're in the program, and the third part of career outcomes. Depending on the program, there are different measurements for each. So for online MBA, getting a job is not obviously a criteria, nor is your actual salary because you are currently employed. So, you know, what hits the road there is things like, well, did you get a promotion that you can directly attribute to being in the program and graduating from it? Did you get a raise directly as a result of it? Did you change jobs directly as a result of the program? And then we actually even asked more vague questions to get at other reasons why a person would want an online MBA, as opposed to us imposing a reason on them and then measuring it. So without asking them to identify the primary reason they're getting an MBA, we basically ask, did the degree fulfill the primary reason for getting it? Because the primary reason could in fact be that they wanted to change jobs, or it could be that they simply wanted to be more confident at work and learn the business basics so that they'd be more effective. Rather than us tell them, judge why they should get it, we wanted to judge whether their goals were met by the program. So we asked for both primary and secondary goals and how the programs fulfilled them. And we make tweaks like that. So I think in each of these pieces, the career outcomes, the assessment of the academic and extracurricular experience, however difficult to measure because of what I mentioned about student and graduate surveys before, and then the inputs, basic admission stats on percentage of people in the undergraduate field who graduated from the top 10% of their class or who are national merit scholars, or what the SAT scores were, or work experience at GMAT, whatever. Those measurements count too, and I think each of these pieces represent 1/3 of the puzzle. So the online MBA ranking, as I mentioned before, USC Marshall came in first. We actually had done it earlier in the year, and we wanted to get the learning from that leveraged and published this next list and put it more in cycle, which is why we actually came out with 2 of these this year, because the goal is to do the online MBA ranking in the early fall of every year, because I really feel like when people get back to work in September, that's when they get back to work on everything, and they start really seriously considering educational options, particularly in an online space as opposed to maybe the full-time MBA market. Our undergraduate ranking will be out December 3rd or 4th. That's a Monday or Tuesday, first Monday or Tuesday of December. Last year, we ranked a little over 80 programs. We're hoping to rank 100 this year. That ranking is getting very well established. And again, the reason why we did that, and I got to tell you, the last thing I wanted to do when I started Poets and Quants is to do rankings, because I did rankings forever at Business Week. But the schools also came to us after Business Week decided not to rank on undergraduate programs anymore. They were absolutely disgusted at the U.S. News ranking, which is really the only one that exists of any note for undergraduate business programs. And as you know, the reason why they were so unhappy is because it's based on one metric, their peer assessment survey, that goes to deans and senior faculty, most of whom, let's admit, don't know a damn thing about what's going on at other schools. And so it tends to be a popularity contest, or it tends to be you take out the ranking from the previous year and you do some checks on the form, which is a really long form, and it's kind of ridiculous, and it really means nothing. I've always maintained that deans often don't even know what's going on their own campus, never mind someone else's campus. So they have no wherewithal to be rating the quality of these schools, except at the very high level where you probably will rank a school based on PhD output and the quality of the scholars coming out of them, as opposed to the quality of the actual programming delivered to an undergraduate student. So we took the same approach, as I said before, 1/3 weight on admission standards, 1/3 weight on the academic experience, and 1/3 weight on career outcomes. We publish a guidebook every year. We go to the annual conference of high school guidance counselors and undergraduate admission consultants, and we hand that guidebook out for free. We also sell it in the marketplace, and we also distribute it more widely to high schools and colleges, so that it has a lot of impact. And the guide is a terrific publication because it has profiles of every single school that we have in the ranking, and a full listing of all the findings that we've discovered. And I think that's a helpful tool for undergraduates who want to major in business. As I mentioned before, the top traffic go-getter on the site these days has become our Meet the Class series. We are about 1/3 finished with that. And, you know, in addition to the fact that we're really doing a lot of, you know, this is a hot time where people are very excited about business school and business programs, because they're applying, they're waiting for results, or they're basically about to be interviewed. They're looking for help. They're also looking for, you know, who should I go to if I get accepted? And if I have my acceptances, how do I make those choices? And that's what we're all about. And the Meet the Class series helps a lot, because I think, you know, here you get to see profiles of newly admitted students. You see who a school is admitting, at least a representative sample of them. And I think it's really beautifully designed because we asked the people how they made their choice. We asked what are the schools they've applied to. So you get a sense of what peer group schools might fall in, and where the reach schools are, safety schools, et cetera, in terms of an application strategy. You also get from the students what they think applicants should know about the school. And then Jeff Schmidt, who's our senior correspondent, really does, I think, a great job in trying to capture the essence of each program so that these pieces are in part profiles on the MBA program, where it is currently, how it stacks up against its peer schools, who are the kinds of students that are getting admitted, what does that class profile look like this year compared to previous years, as well as how does it compare against peer schools. And you put a face on it because I think people ultimately love reading about other people. And these are just, you know, again, you read through the profiles on the Meet the Class series, and the big takeaway is, wow, these are incredible people. I would love to be with them. And for those few people out there, I hope they're few, who still think that MBAs are sharp-elbowed, greedy sons of bitches who are only interested in money, I think those profiles put that to rest very quickly, because you won't find a brighter, more eclectic, more caring group of young professionals that will give you hope for the future. In these series profiles, they're just fantastic. Some of the things that we have coming up besides the undergraduate ranking and the composite ranking, and our coverage of obviously the Bloomberg Business Week and the Wall Street Journal ranking, are our summations of the year. You know, we've been doing for quite a few years now a Dean of the Year story, where we recognize one dean in the world who we think has done just an absolute incredible job in leading his organization, his school, through difficult times, regular times, building on the school, and that has become a very popular feature. It's totally subjective. There are no votes. It's based on our editorial team will get together and we'll just thrash it out. Last year, we started for the first time an MBA Program of the Year. We will also do that. And what we're looking for there are sort of more innovative and new and different approaches to MBA education primarily. Although we call it Program of the Year because we could, in fact, do a specialized master's or an online MBA. So, but and incidentally, for all of these, we have finalists in mind already. But if any of you out there would like to just send me an email and nominate your dean, your program, or professor, believe me, I'll read it all. We'll really seriously consider it and think about it. So as I mentioned before, we also do a Professor of the Year. And that's basically, so where the Dean of the Year is based on accomplishment, and the Program of the Year is based largely on innovation, the Professor of the Year is based on extraordinary impact to students. Yes, a research contribution can matter, particularly if it's really outstanding. But really, we're looking for people who have touched their students in a way that they've transformed them, that they've made a real difference in their lives, and that really matters to them. That's the kind of professors we're looking for. And then another feature we have at the end of the year is the 10 business schools to watch. And again, our editorial team meets and we basically shout and yell at each other over which programs and schools to include and why. That process has already begun. In fact, this week I had a lively session with Jeff Schmidt, who does that piece. And I think we're going to come up with a really great list. USC, incidentally, is one of the few schools in America that had an increase in applications, and they attributed their increase in part to being on that list, 10 business schools to watch for last year. So, that's a basic sense of where we are. A couple of things about Poets and Quants that I just want to cover. Besides the fact that this is the hot period where our traffic is kind of going through the roof, it amazes me that in the last 4 weeks, we had 450,000 different people on the site alone. Because my God, there aren't that many applicants in the elite and highly selective applicant pool where we really do most of our coverage. But I think we're getting a broader array of people who are interested in online MBA, especially master's degrees, and people who are in the early cycle of consideration. Because, as anyone knows, there are 18 months where people are considering the MBA and thinking about their options and whether it's good for them, and then what kind of schools they should be looking at before they even take the GMAT. So there are a lot of people in that part of the funnel that we're getting, which is pushing up the uniques to 450,000 a month at this time. One thing that we're testing that I wanted to just note for all of our clients is we are testing a micropayment and subscriber plan. I really feel deeply that the quality of our content is such, and uniqueness is of a nature that would allow us to actually put up some sort of paywall. And there was a Stanford MBA out of this latest graduating class who started a micropayment company and came to me, and we are one of his first clients. This is an experiment at this point. It's a pilot. So we're playing around with different offers and seeing how they work. So far, only 6% of our audience has even seen this, and it hasn't been imposed on anyone, and we don't intend to impose it on anyone in the near future, but we are increasing that experiment from 6% of our audience to 20% of our audience, and it's basically a plan to recognize that our content has value and that we want people to pay for it to some degree. We will not lock everything up, and we'll do this very judiciously and smartly. The firm that we're partnering with, a great group of young people, super smart. I feel really lucky to have found them and for them to have found us, because they're really pioneering some new things here. So the other thing I should point out is, we had with Matt Simon's 9 center court events this year. We went from only 3, we tripled. I think, frankly, like Sinatra said in My Way, we probably bit off more than we can chew, to be totally honest with you. And we learned some valuable lessons. There were a few events that we were disappointed in the turnout. And I think it had to do with timing. It had to do with a number of factors, frankly, including a decline in MBA applicants. But we learned some valuable lessons. We are doing center court again next year, of course. But we're going to do the cities that we've already been highly successful in, like New York and London and Washington, D.C. and San Francisco. So we're going to bring it back a little bit more. We're going to do some really cool and interesting changes to the format. Because again, what that is all about is trying to reinvent and rethink an old, stale business model where a bunch of schools get together and go into sterile ballrooms in hotels. We're trying to enliven it up with more content. Each of these events are a content generation event, because we want the event to transcend the physical boundaries of the center court where in the city that's being held in. And you're going to see over the next couple of weeks a tremendous amount of content coming out on the site and being promoted on our social media channels from our center court events. And the content's terrific. I mean, judging from the events themselves and the reaction that we've gotten from the people who were there. And this includes my panels with leading deans. It includes Matt's panels with the leading admission directors, as well as a thing that we pioneered this year called the committee, where what we do is we put up different profiles from actual attendees, and we pretend that we're in an admissions committee meeting and people are actually debating the merits of a person's application. So all that stuff is going to be going up on the site and being pushed very aggressively. I'm going to go and I've got a number of questions here. I have a couple of my colleagues with me, and I'm going to have them pick out some of the questions for me because we've got quite a few, and I'll try to answer everything you want me to answer. So what do we have?
So we have a couple of rankings questions.
Yeah.
One of them is asking, I think, with regard to the online MBA rankings, with some top schools not participating in that ranking, are there specific schools that you think might be able to take advantage of the built-in step up in rankings by virtue of their and the top schools not being there?
Well, in the online MBA ranking?
I think it was a question that came out when you were talking about the online MBA ranking.
Okay, well, I would think that that actually applies more to the Wall Street Journal, the higher education ranking. And yes, absolutely, the schools that did decide to participate, they're going to benefit greatly from much higher ranks than they would customarily get by virtue of the absence of some of the schools like MIT, Columbia, Harvard, and Kellogg. So, and while the overall ranking may not have all that credibility or authority, the truth is those schools are going to be able to use that in marketing messages. And some people, let's face it, there are a lot of people who are uninformed, and those folks who are uninformed will pay attention to it, and it could matter. So there's that. On any of the rankings where you have people who decide not to participate, and there were a number of good schools that decided not to participate in the latest Economist ranking. There were some in our online ranking, including some of in our undergraduate ranking that's about to come out. In fact, two schools we really wanted to have in the undergraduate ranking that we don't have is USC and Arizona State, both for different kinds of reasons. And they'll probably both participate next year, but for whatever reason, they decided not to participate this year. And in the online MBA ranking, we didn't allow Temple to participate because of the scandal there over the falsification of data. We'll probably invite them to participate next year. And I'd say most of all the high quality programs did participate in our online MBA ranking. If there's one school I really missed, it would have been the University of Illinois, and they just felt that they didn't have enough time to put all their stuff together for us. But I like that program very much. It's at a very low price point. It's very innovative. It's based on Coursera courses and accessibility, and I'm sure that they'll be in the ranking next year. But the online MBA ranking, I'd say we got really all the big and major players where we really, so University of Illinois, yeah, I wish we had them there. The other thing I wish we had were Imperial, Warwick, and IE Business School. Next year we will globalize that ranking and make sure that we include international players as well. It's the early part of it. We want to just get it right. And make sure we're doing the right thing to be fair. One change, for example, that occurred was, schools that didn't require the submission of a standardized test for an online MBA program were penalized in the first go round. A lot of schools came back to us and said, well, look, in the online space, work experience matters more than it might in a 2-year MBA program. So we basically then said, okay, if you have people in your program who have 10 or more years of work experience, which is more like an executive MBA program, you can argue if it's 7 or 10. I'm going to say it's 10 is better because in even a full-time MBA program, you get up to 5 and even more. So that's not substantial enough for my liking to waive a GMAT or a GRE. So, but we gave credit to schools that had, if they didn't have a GMAT or GRE for an enrolled student, they had an enrolled student with 10 or more years experience And we give credit for that in this go round. And I think that was a good and honest tweak to make, although some schools didn't benefit from that. And of course, they were unhappy. But it's, you want to tweak these things. You want to do the best possible job you can. And you don't also want to tweak them just to get changes, but to improve the ranking. I think I like where we are on both the undergraduate and the online MBA ranking. I like the composite weighting that we're using. I don't anticipate any other changes there.
Is Poets and Quants considering a ranking of executive programs and or specialized master's programs?
That's a really good question. When I was at Business Week, and incidentally, the Business Week ranking, the 30-year anniversary is this year. So it was 30 years ago today, to borrow part of a Beatles song, that I launched that ranking, which was the first regularly published ranking of MBA programs. And then we came out right after that with an executive education ranking and an executive MBA ranking, each of which has been discontinued by Business Week. I think probably we need a better executive MBA ranking, to be totally honest. And that is, in terms of our own priorities, we have 5 websites. But in terms of our own priorities, I would put very high on the list executive MBAs that we've covered, but we haven't covered as aggressively or as thoughtfully as we have covered the full-time MBA market, or even online and specialized masters, where we have specialized hubs on our main site for each of those categories, or even the undergraduate business market, where we have a very fast-growing site. And this year, the growth on the undergraduate site was off the charts. It was spectacular. So I do think we might do executive MBAs, and I probably would like to do some specialty master's rankings at some point. Obviously, finance and accounting, the old standbys, are the biggest ones, but the hottest area, as I mentioned before, is analytics. And but I don't know, these rankings, they take a lot of effort and a lot of time. Schools don't exactly love them. When we do the rankings that we have done, we've done collaboratively. We've literally reached out to the schools and asked them, what should we be measuring? How should we be measuring? What weight should we be putting on this stuff? We even put the methodology out in the Google Doc and asked people to critique it. And we read the critiques religiously and seriously and try to improve it. I'm going to be honest, tell you what you get. Oftentimes you get people who are basically so self-interested, they're trying to get you to create methodologies that will favor them individually, as opposed to the industry, or get a real good read. But nonetheless, we think that back and forth is really helpful for us and for people in the industry.
There's a question about our international audience, and it's a kind of a multi-tiered question. So the 35% of Poets and Quants audience that are international, how is that in relation to last year, up or down? And you had mentioned that European programs have not gone way up in applicants. How are Canadian schools applications? Are they up, slightly up, or?
Yeah, good point. Those are good questions. So our international audience is relatively stable at 35%. We don't see any growth. You should know that we are, however, kind of semi-blocked in China. So that's one thing to consider. Outside the US, the biggest single market, not surprisingly, is India, where obviously, all schools are overrepresented in their applicant pools. But then it comes down to the UK, Canada, Singapore, Hong Kong, France, Germany. Those are all really good, strong international markets for us. Canadian schools are by and large up. They're up more significantly than the European schools. And I think it's obviously a result of their pro-immigration policy. The fact that an MBA there is cheaper, it's North America as well, and maybe it's a step closer to the United States. And you're getting, you got some pretty good, damn good schools in Canada, I have to tell you, okay? And the visa in Canada is easy to get and really very generous and helpful for an international candidate. But again, I think a lot of people are postponing their decision. They're just holding back and waiting. And then some are, in fact, going to a European or Asian or Canadian school instead of a US school.
One last question. How do you think 2U and Coursera are disrupting the MBA market?
I think 2U has, first off, I think Coursera has, my sense of it is peaked. I think the whole MOOC thing it's less kind of interesting, and there's much less growth there than there had been before. And I think 2U, because they're charging so much money to do it. I mean, they're growing, but they haven't earned a penny of profit. Their losses are increasing. Their losses are in the tens of millions of dollars. They're now getting as much as 65% of all the revenue from schools that go on their platform. So I think, I just don't see how 2U is going to make, at least in the MBA world, going to make this work for more schools. And what you're seeing is their fees have become so high, and they have so many MBA programs in particular right now that other schools are trying to do different things. Michigan Ross has not decided to go with 2U, while UC Davis is going with 2U and Rice has gone with 2U. You see Washington University has decided to pony up $10 million and have its business school do a proprietary platform. The dean there came from Warwick, which developed their own proprietary platform. He literally went out and he hired people who developed that platform for Warwick, created essentially a subsidiary in the UK, and they're now developing their own digital platform at the business school level, but will be used by the entire university, Washington University. And then even today, news broke that 6 European schools had banded together to invest in a proprietary technology platform to deliver long-distance programming as opposed to going to a vendor, because the vendors have become too expensive. Now, I'll say one thing for 2U, and this is one of the reasons why they've had some success in signing up some very good programs, including, of course, UNC, Rice, Simmons, Syracuse, and now UC Davis, is if you feel like you're late to the game, or you don't have the money to do this on your own, or you just don't have the wherewithal, meaning the time, the energy, and the money, and the recruitment part is tricky, right? Because there's so much competition. So if you can turn that over to a vendor and basically deal with giving them 65% of all the revenue, at least it will go up. It'll be high quality. They'll help you with the marketing and recruitment of the students. Although I think there is definitely dilution in the recruitment efforts based on what I'm seeing. But that takes a lot off the table, and it makes it easier to get out fast, particularly if you've been waiting around and you haven't decided to go forward yet. I think over the next 3 to 5 years, we're going to see a few more of the top 10 programs come in with online MBAs. So you're going to see more competition there and more severe competition. But the one interesting thing about that market is that despite the fact that when online MBAs first came into being, the thinking was that, well, if you would normally have gone from a regional or local market to a bigger brand, because now you can, right? Because physical boundaries are not restricting your ability to go to school, you would have taken advantage of a bigger brand. But the truth is, the research shows that people in online programs are by and large from a 250-mile radius from the campus that's offering the program. So you're still getting a lot of, the majority of people attending the program are those who are nearby the campus. And I think you're still seeing that. So even when you get a Michigan Ross come in, or USC Marshall, or obviously UNC or Indiana has been in the game a long time, Carnegie Mellon has a very differentiated 3-year, very expensive program. and you're getting that kind of quality in the market, they're not seeing as many apps as I would have thought they would have seen from places that are far from their home campuses. So I kind of think 2U is going to have more difficulty because they haven't been able to earn a penny of profit yet, and they're racking up huge losses. They are a public company. The pressure on that company is going to increase. I do think they have a good product, however, but I just think that the amount of money they're asking from schools is extremely high, and their programs tend to be more costly than rivals. In some cases, even rivals with much better brands. So that's just not going to play. And while the Coursera thing, we just saw there are only 2 MBA programs based on the Coursera platform. I think you probably will see a few more, but I think the basis of Coursera is MOOCs and the bundling of MOOCs into specializations. And I don't see tremendous growth there. I see a flattening, if not declining growth, in part because the market's been penetrated, the novelty is worn off, and that's just the way it is. Long term, as online education gets even more credibility, and here's the big breakthrough that you're going to be looking for. Will the likes of Amazon, McKinsey, Morgan Stanley, will the big recruiters of MBAs and business students, the people who hire MBAs and other business graduates by the boatload, when they start seriously hiring online graduates, you're going to see a real big shift. That's when you're going to see more cannibalization and you're going to see more disruption. But until that happens, I think it's kind of, yes, it's disrupting the market, but it's not disrupting the market in a way that changes the entire game the way Amazon has, Facebook has, or Google has. So there you have it. That's at least my opinion. Some of you may disagree with that, and I'm happy to hear you out because I am a reporter and I listen really intently. So, hey, I hope this is helpful in some way. Thanks for joining us. Again, if you're interested in marketing, promotion, or what we can do for you, do reach out to our publisher, Sat Sharma, who's been with us now for a few years and who you well know because he's been selling Poets and Quants for 9 years. We are entering, our 10th anniversary year, and we're planning some really cool things for our 10th anniversary. This thing has grown by leaps and bounds. It is remarkable to me. I feel very lucky. I have great gratitude for having been able to leave old media and the magazine business that I was in and to start something on my own fresh and to see it succeed and grow and become so important to so many people. One of the great things, frankly, is wherever we go, and Sat will confirm this, when we go and we record video on a campus, we're doing some really cool video. We have a cool video coming out, for example, on the Carnegie Mellon's new home. And that should be out within days. There's a great video on the site on the Rotman School. There's some great video on the Darden School. We did an incredible event with Michigan Ross, a live stream event with 3 panels earlier this year. And the number of page views on the edited transcripts and the number of video views is just unbelievable, well over 50,000 on the Michigan Ross MBA Summit thing. We're doing more of these different things. It's really been incredibly gratifying. But what I was going to get to is wherever we go, people come up to us and they thank us for being there and for providing the kind of information to help them make the right choice, make an informed choice for them, where to go, what to expect, how to overcome the hurdles, how to get inspiration to run the marathon, to get into a highly selective MBA program. All the kinds of things that make for more educated, more thoughtful applicants and ultimately more desirable students, I hope. So thanks for watching, and we got a lot of great stuff coming up. So keep your eyes on the site because it doesn't stop. Thanks. Bye-bye.